Today's speaker, Texa Sim. She'll be talking about the conservation and detection dogs. Detection dogs have proven to be more efficient than humans in locating and identifying a broad range of ecological targets, including for conservation efforts to find rare species and to detect invasive organisms threatening ecosystems. Conservation Detection Dogs Scotland is supporting this kind of work in Scotland and is also undertaking pioneering projects to investigate ecology dog use for both terrestrial and marine species. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Dr. Texa Sim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk all things dogs and kind of chat through some of the applications that have been used with dogs and some of the stuff that I'm working on with the organisation that I've started called Conservation Detection Dogs Scotland. So just a real quick background about myself. I've got a background in marine ecology, specifically around marine mammals, but I have also been involved in native oyster restoration projects in a previous role in a community conservation charity. I'm also a search and rescue dog handler and a conservation detection dog handler. So where this all comes in. So why dogs? What is in the nose? So I'm sure many of you who have dogs or are aware of dogs, they have this highly complex olfactory system that allows them essentially to see the world through scent. And that it ranges between 10,000 and 100 times thousand more sensitive, 100,000 times more sensitive than humans in terms of their abilities to scent. So dogs have been trained to detect a huge range of various targets, not just things to do with ecology and conservation, but also you may be familiar with explosive dogs, dogs that are trained to detect firearms, dogs that are trained to detect drugs, and these are actually commonly used in the police as well and the armed forces. But what it all comes down to is this really complex scenting capacity within the nose itself, made up of a range of different tissues and areas within the snout that lead back to the olfactory bulb, which processes all that information. So that allows the dogs to really use their scent to get as much information as possible from the world around them. So this is just a quick kind of example of how we might use a dog and why this is a good way to kind of look for something that has a scent. Now everything has a scent, everything is producing a scent, and what those materials are made up of will depend on how those scent molecules behave. What's often complicating that is the environment around it, the wind direction, and the material it's made of. So that will determine how many scent molecules are released and how they behave. So what we probably want to do is get the dog to detect where the scent molecules are actually beginning and follow that track into where those scent molecules are most targeted, most concentrated, which would be hopefully the likely location of that target. So that would be your ideal, very simplified scent search pattern where the dog's doing a nice defined search area. That's something that you'll teach it through the course of this work, and then hitting upon the scent molecules which are diffused and dispersed and leading that into the target scent source. So as I said, there's lots of complicating aspects to this, which makes you really have to be careful on how you're designing your search area, how you're training your dog, and how you might expect the scent of a particular target to behave. So things like vegetation can be quite tricky. Scent molecules can get caught within vegetation. It might bring them higher, it might bring them lower. You've got temperature and the kind of humidity of the environment really influence how scent molecules behave. And also things like undulating terrain and the presence of water as well can have a huge influence on how a dog might be able to detect the scent and the likelihood it will be able to pick it up. So once we've kind of had a wee think about what we're looking at with our target, so we're choosing a target, we have a system in place where we will teach the dog to recognise and indicate on that scent presence. what is kind of preceding all of this information is your dog selection. So it's really important to be choosing the correct dog with the right kind of drive and the right kind of ability to do this kind of work. And the process is involved with taking it up to the point of odor recognition and indication. But eventually, what you want to be having is a dog that searches the area effectively, recognizes the scent, and indicates the presence of the scent to the handler in a clear way. So once the target is located and the indication is given, then you give your reward. And that is essentially what your dog is working for. That is what is driving it to produce these behaviors that lead to your target scent being found. You will practice with your target scent in lots of different areas, lots of different types of equipment to ensure that the dog is generalized and able to really determine what your target is. And then finally, as I said, the motivation and the search is all driven by the desire for the reward. And that can be toys, can also be food, but ultimately it's all about fun. If the dog isn't enjoying it, if the dog isn't finding it a game, then you're very unlikely to succeed in this kind of work. So your dog needs to be really interested in the play, and it's your job to make that play very fun. So conservation dogs, what's this all about? For conservation or ecology detection dogs, the target scent typically includes specific species, traces, or environmental issues related to conservation biology, and that also includes plant, animal, or fungal species as well. So dogs in this capacity were first trained for conservation in the late 1880s when a trainer trained dogs to locate kiwi and kakapo in New Zealand, and that was very successful in locating those really rare species. And since then, there's now a vast range of species that ecology dogs have been successfully trained to detect. And in the terrestrial environment, we've got everything from bats to water voles to Japanese knotweed. And I've got a couple of examples, those pictures there on the screen, which I found really fascinating, more towards the aquatic targets. So on the far left, you'll see a dog kind of having a very controlled search around a boat propeller, and that's actually from the US Great Lakes, where there's a program in place to protect the spread of a highly invasive aquatic species called the quagga and zebra mussel. So in the Great Lakes, these species are a real big problem. They're spreading between lakes and they cause really massive issues with the natural ecosystem and also clogging up water systems and other pipes and that sort of thing, which are obviously really important for human activity. So what they've done is established a really effective dog detection program where these trained dogs check vessels and any equipment moving between launch points between the Great Lakes. And this is used year on, year out to ensure the spread of these species can be kept to a minimum. The middle picture is referring to carp, which are actually an invasive species in many freshwater systems, but particularly in New Zealand. So this is looking at a project where they were trying to determine whether ecology detection dogs could detect carp odor within water samples. And what they found was that carp odor at a dilution equivalent of 9.3 carp per hectare, which equals 0.5 milligrams of carp per litre, was something that the dogs could actually detect. And that is actually similar to the sensitivity levels you can achieve via eDNA analysis of water, which is quite fascinating and just shows you how powerful the dog's nose can be. And then finally, the far right picture is actually a dog trained to detect the presence of whale scat or feces. This is a project of the US, the coast of the US, Washington, and also in British Columbia, where the southern resident killer whale population are very, very not doing that well and are really needing to understand what's going on with their health. So what they have done is trained dogs to provide the ability to detect the poo within the ocean which then can be collected and analysed for various things like stress metabolites, genetics, and diet. And obviously, finding and collecting cetacean poo in the ocean is going to be pretty hard for a human, but for a dog who's trained on it, it can basically indicate the direction of where that poo will be in the water and guide the researchers into it to then collect. So, just some examples of some really fascinating and very diverse projects that use dogs to great effect. So, benefits of dogs, we've got dogs can be faster, they cover the ground more efficiently, more effectively, especially if you're looking at larger areas. They're very good at determining the difference between quite visually similar targets, which might be quite difficult for us to do unless we back that up with further investigation. They're very effective for targets that are found at low densities, particularly where human searchers might find that quite tricky. And also the benefit is a dog doesn't need to be just on one target, but can actually be on multiple targets, meaning that you can get lots of different target scents and use a dog in lots of different capacities. So in the UK, there's quite a few different projects that have historically and currently using dogs for various species. So there's quite a few different projects looking at mink, the invasive species, which is causing issues for lots of different native species around the UK. That's typically involving mink scat. Similarly, otter, there are dogs that are being trained on otter holts, where on resting places where you can actually indicate the presence of the otter that had been there previously. There's dogs working on tree pathogens called Phytophthora, sorry, trying to detect whether the presence of that is within a particular tree and then helping forestry to take out trees that are impacted by it. There are dogs working on crayfish, both the invasive crayfish and the native white claw crayfish. There have been projects on hedgehog detection in the outer isles in previous years, and there are dogs out there also operationally detecting knotweed, particularly in its died back winter rhizome form within the ground. So there's massive spread just in the UK as well, and again across many different types of environments and habitats. So one terrestrial project and species that I'm involved with is bats, and that's particularly for bat collisions at wind farms. And it's obviously illegal to have the incidental killing under the Habitats Directive of bats. So it's a problem for turbines that might be placed in places where bats could also be. So there's also the issue with the collision itself of the moving turbine, but also the barotrauma trauma associated with bats being close to moving turbine blades, and that can cause problems as well. So for the wind farms, it's really important to understand mortality for any mitigation that they can actually do. And some turbine locations are more likely to have bat strikes, particularly if they're near woodland or some species that are present that might be more at risk due to the particular flight patterns and heights that they fly at. So dogs can offer a really good method for detecting carcasses around wind farms, because often these carcasses can be particularly small or even just parts of a carcass, making it really difficult to search if you were a person and not a dog. So this is a kind of just a real quick example of what a search like this might kind of look like. You've got your turbine in the middle there, and for it, depending on the height of the turbine, you'll decide how far around that turbine you'll search. Typically, you could choose a 50-meter radius out from the turbine. And then what you'd want to do is understand what the environment and the habitat around the turbine looks like. Have you got standing water? Have you got areas you can't access? Have you got foliage that might be complex that you might want to make sure you spend a bit more time on with the dog? And then what you would do is design this is a very simple and not always what you might do. This is just a quick example of where you would walk as a handler, and then perhaps how you would also then run the dog to essentially zip up the area completely and have really good coverage. What you'd also want to do is measure the carcass persistence of anything within the area. And that is basically measuring the removal rate of carcasses by predators. So you can allow for the probability of your dog actually detecting the carcass in the first place. So moving from bats onto the marine environment, what we're working on are some kind of novel species detections and working out whether dogs could be a really effective method of doing this. So there are quite a limited number of marine invasive species that have been worked on with dogs. Obviously, there are challenges with working with dogs in a marine environment. However, it could offer a really promising technique for biosecurity in the intertidal and on marine infrastructure that gets exposed at low tide. So two species that we're working on currently, the carpet sea squirt, Didynum vexillum, that is a colonial ascidian species making up these kind of mat-like colonies. When they get large enough, and usually in the summer months, they start to extend into the water column, which gives them their colloquial name as sea vomit, which is very exciting. They were native to Japan and kind of turned up on our shores around between, we think, 2005 and 2008, around about that time. And they cause a big problem for many reasons, but they're also able to multiply through asexual budding, which means that if a part falls off and gets moved around by the currents, by the tides, it could potentially settle and start to spread in a new location. So in the UK, this is obviously a species of concern. What we find is that because of the asexual budding and because it is just quickly able to grow, it grows and spreads really easily. And once it does, it can smother infrastructure and cultivated species, so for shellfish aquaculture, for example. And it's really quite difficult to remove and manage once it's established. What we found is that it's spreading in the UK, and some new sites, particularly in Scottish waters, have been recently identified, which makes it a bit of a worry that this species might be spreading. And one issue is also that it can be really difficult to identify by eye from other colonial sea squirt species. For example, those two pictures, only one of them is Divex, the other one is another native species. So typically, if you had confusion there and it is difficult to tell, you would send samples away for DNA analysis. The second species we're working on is the American slipper limpet. This is native to the east coast of the Americas and has arrived in the UK quite a long time ago. However, is now starting to spread from those established areas and has recently been discovered in the Scottish northeast coasts, which has led to a big scramble for management options. It really does spread very rapidly. It's a protandrous hermaphrodite, which means that the animals begin their lives as males and then subsequently change sex and develop into females. What they do is they stack upon each other, and the bottom animal is usually a male, and all the females build up on top. And the females can produce 4,000 larvae per female, which allows them to kind of rapidly cover. They cause a lot of damage to native ecosystems by outcompeting the organisms that we typically find. So they're definitely a problem and a species of concern. So my question was, can we use ecology detection dogs to detect these species? So there was a kind of protocol that we wanted to put in place for this to make this as rigorous and science-based as possible. So first of all, we had to establish a sample source and a reliable source of the samples. Now, this is the tricky side, well, many tricky sides to training, but one of them is making sure you've got fresh samples the dogs can work on that you can replenish when you need to do so. So that involved some interesting conversations with various sites to kind of identify how we could possibly do this. Also maintaining the samples, so when it's not possible to visit sites frequently, depending where they are in geography-wise, whether it's appropriate to keep them in captivity, and it's making sure that the biosecurity and the licenses that might be appropriate to that are all sought and covered. Finally, well, not finally, but as part of the process, you've got the odor recognition and the indication, really testing, really testing the dogs to ensure that you are actually getting them on the scent that you think you are, and ensuring that they are trained on the scent of these invasive species. What part of that is also ensuring that they can discriminate the odor, making sure they can actually tell the species, the invasive, next to another thing they might find operationally. So, you know, a slipper limpet versus a normal patella vulgata. So, you know, that sort of thing is really important so that the dogs are capable of determining what is the target you're looking for. And then finally, trialing the dogs in controlled but known invasive species places, trying to understand the dog's efficiency, particularly when it comes to the search. So all of this, particularly the last three kind of points, follow recognized scientific testing to determine the success of the training. And that includes understanding your true positive, false negative, and true negative rates, and also running any tests in a double-blind capacity where the handler and the trial assessor don't know where the targets are, so that you're getting a really clear and non-biased result. So what we would do is an odor recognition test, which controls the test scenario and tests the dog's ability to recognize your target. And then efficiency trials to test the effectiveness of the dog within the search area and the coverage of an area to find the targets. So part of this is just kind of working through the various stages. So this is a wee sample of Dvex Didylum vexillum, the carpet sea squirt, placed within a scent wall, which is a really useful tool when you're doing odor imprinting. The scent target is there in the wall, and this is the dog working on that wall and finding the location of the scent. So you notice there the dog, she's searching quite nicely, she's quite methodical, and once she finds the scent, she's giving a passive indication, which is a sit and stare, which allows me to know that she's found the target and I can also see where it is. Similarly, you might run a kind of more controlled scenario with scent pots. These are really useful for discrimination where you have your target scent versus other scents in the environment. So, for example, I've got carpet sea squirt in one of these and another type of native sponge in another. So I want her to ignore the non-target scent and indicate on the target scent. And there she goes. So you notice as well, that is a nice sit stare indication, and she gets the toy when she's performed the desired behavior. So it's all good fun, you get a good play, and the dog's really keen to keep going. This is another example of a different dog working on the scent wall, again for one of the invasive species. This time on a lead, it's really important that the dog is comfortable using and wearing lots of different types of equipment so that you can use that in the field if necessary. So that dog has a little bit of a different indication. She's got a kind of pause and freeze rather than a sit stare, which is fine as long as it can be recognized and is really confident. So you might have missed it was quite quick. It was kind of at the end. Yeah, so that's a different dog working on a similar scent. And then finally, kind of once you've really established a really strong base in this, you've tested this really thoroughly. You've done your operational your odor recognition tests. You want to start pulling this out into the marine environment where the animal is then going to be exposed to all the normal scents it might find in a marine setting. So the seaweeds, other species of mollusk, anything native. What I want the dog to be doing is ignoring all of that and looking really nicely and giving a good search for this is for Dvex. So as you can imagine, this is a really complex search area. The air will be moving scent around all the boulders. The dog she's quite experienced, so she's really having a real thorough look at some of the larger areas, a little bit of directional control, which allows me to push her into places I feel that she probably needs to look into a bit closer. And that is the indication there, a freeze. And that was it. She found the target. So it's quite an exciting prospect that we might be able to use dogs for this as in an operational setting. The species can be hard to find, they're spreading rapidly, and there's various places where it's becoming a bit of a squeeze point, particularly shellfish aquaculture, marine restoration projects, things that are, using native oysters, for example. Biosecurity is a really big part of both industry and for restoration. So whether dogs could potentially offer a really effective solution to check over infrastructure or incoming stock. Port and harbour biosecurity could be also part of this. Again, with movements of various equipment around port sites, having a dog that can potentially detect a species that's particularly up and coming and new to an area would be a really good way of kind of ticking off that biosecurity. And also the kind of management and removal has big prospects, particularly slipper limpets, where they're arising in various places in the intertidal, where they are now being managed and removed by volunteers, where a dog would be able to cover that ground much more quickly and the individuals could be removed, which would be an outcome part of the control of the spread. So ultimately, dogs can be, in the appropriate projects, a powerful tool for conservation. They allow a high degree of efficacy and accuracy. They can be cost effective and allowing rapid identification of your targets. There is rigorous training and scientific process behind all of this, and that is really the key to success. And the use of dogs can be flexible and bespoke, which really is quite exciting and could be lend them as useful for many different types of projects. And what I'm really excited about is with the work on slipper limpets and carpet sea squirt, these are targets that haven't really been looked at with dogs before. The question was whether it would even be feasible, would the dogs even be capable of detecting something like those species? And with the strong indication that the answer is yes, now we're asking what are the limits of detection? What could we actually use dogs for? How many other things that might be out there where we could use them effectively? So I think I'll just wrap up there. Hopefully that's in enough time. And yeah, I really look forward to any questions anybody might have. And thank you very much.
Clearly some very good dogs doing some very hard work on behalf of conservation. So that's amazing. We've got a lot of questions come in. You've still got time to submit some questions before we finish. So go for that now if you'd like to. The first question is, how long does it take to train a dog on a particular scent?
That's a great question. I get asked that all the time, and unfortunately, there's no clean answer. It depends. It depends whether you're talking about an experienced dog that's worked in this field before, whether it's a green dog. The younger dogs, take longer to get this in hand, and on your target scent. So something like the carpet sea squirt, it's been a year and a half of progress on that, simply because of the potential for it being so similar to other Ascidian species. So it's been really important to be working really, really, thoroughly through those discrimination trials to make sure that what you think you've trained, you have trained. So yeah, a bit of a non-answer, but certainly it depends. In very experienced dogs that are going on to slightly less complex target scents, it can take not that long at all. Up potentially a month if you were really training very hard, but I wouldn't say that that's a standard. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Next question is, how did you get into this area specifically? Are there any training courses you have to take?
Great question. Yeah, so I'd never grew up with dogs actually. It was the one pet wasn't allowed when I was growing up. I got into dogs through search and rescue. So I started in search and rescue, still am in search and rescue with a qualified search dog. And I learned about conservation dogs probably around about 2022 and was just fascinated by the concept that we could work with them in this way. So what I did then was kind of investigated what the best way to try and get my experience. I do still do lots of courses and workshops, and did the Lantra conservation dog handler course, which is I think one of the only courses out there. So that's one option to kind of get started. What I would say is that the best way to kind of explore this is talk to other handlers, try and get down and see if you can get shadowing a handler, for example, to see what it looks like in the field. I am a member of the Ecology Detection Dog Britain and Ireland working group, and we've got some various resources on our website, and we take members from all over. So you don't need to be a dog handler or anything, just you can be interested in the use of dogs, free membership, and we kind of run various seminars and sort of give information on what the whole thing's about. So I would definitely recommend looking that up if you're interested to find out more.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. Can dogs be trained to selectively cull, for example, crayfish to aid with eradication efforts?
That's a good point. So the folk who are working on crayfish, so one of my colleague handlers working in a different company, she is working on both signal crayfish and white claw. The dogs do not touch the target. So for most of the ecology work, we don't want the dogs touching or going anywhere near the target because there's lots of different biosecurity and licenses involved. Great crested newt, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, you wouldn't want a dog touching that because they're highly protected. So no, I don't think there's any projects where the dogs are actually helping kill the species in question. I think it's more for people to go in and then remove it after that. I guess it could be done, but then it would be difficult potentially to have the dog working on another scent that involved not touching. So yeah, that's I'm not sure
Tricky area.
That's something. Yeah.
Do dogs tend to specialize in particular species, or can they be trained to detect lots of different scents?
Yeah, they can. So the dogs, I think in some research have suggested dogs and people have got dogs on up to 40 targets, which I think is just phenomenal. The limiting factor with your target choice is that you need to really be careful on where you've got to, if you're talking about species, for example, what I may be thinking is if you trained a dog on mink scat and you also trained a dog on otter scat and you were out on a project which was only looking at mink and your dog was detecting otter as well because of the similarity in habitat that they share, that might be an issue. So you've got to make sure that your target selection for your dog, if you've got multiple targets, is going to be not too much overlap there. And it really probably depends on the project too. I mean, if some projects are quite happy to have other things being detected, but ultimately it will decrease your speed as well and your kind of coverage if your dog is stopping all the time on something that you're not actually looking for in the project. So yeah.
Can I add a supplemental question of my own to that, which is is it theoretically possible to train the dogs to do different signals for different species?
Yes, absolutely. You could do that.
It would take longer, I assume.
It would take longer. I mean, and dog, actually, one of the dogs I have is not only a search and rescue dog where she has an active indication, as in she barks, because that's what you want in search and rescue, but she's also doing ecology work where I need a passive indication. So they can do two types. Whether you could bring that into your species, to your kind of targets, you probably, but I think it could potentially get confusing. So we like to keep things simple.
Fair. Next question. Can dogs be used to locate sites where bat carcasses were removed by predators, or is that data unreliable since humans can't confirm it?
That's a good question. So, with the bat work, we're typically wanting the dog to actually detect the presence of carcass rather than a trace scent. So you can train dogs to indicate on where something has been, but inherently it's quite hard then to confirm. So it is something that I haven't heard people doing it with bats, for example, but certainly it is trace detection is possible. With the carcass persistence, basically you're actually artificially laying out other carcasses of not of bats but of something else, and then determining how often how many you have left over a certain period of time. So that's what we use to kind of get an idea of potentially how long a bat carcass could actually be in situ. So yes and no, I suppose, again, is the answer.
That's fair enough. This sounds like such a fantastic approach for ports and harbours. Can you highlight any particular UK ports working on these trials?
Um, none that have officially got involved yet. This is the kind of early stage where I think that it has that potential. I will tentatively mention some of the Northeast Partnership ports which have showed interest, particularly with the slipper limpet issue, because that is becoming a big issue in the Northeast. So it's hopefully watch this space. We'll see, you know, where we can go with it. I think if we can get someone on board to work this in an operational capacity and show what it can do, that would be the way to go forward. But yeah, hopefully we'll see some interest over the next few months.
Okay. Next question. We've got so many questions still coming in. Do you have to account for different scents being produced by Dvex or other species over its life cycle or seasonally?
Excellent question. Yes, so I work with Dvex across all seasons. Obviously, it does kind of do this dieback in the winter months, where it kind of really reduces back. So I work with all stages of it, and enough to kind of cover that kind of seasonality there. Haven't found any difference in the dog. You know, I haven't found any more interest in or more accuracy in the summer versus the winter, which I think is very interesting, considering there's obviously physical changes to the animal during the seasons, but the whatever scent they're producing must remain fairly similar because the dog's showing interest in it over the seasons.
Okay. Are there scents that are harder to learn than others? If so, why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really comes down to basically the kind of composition of the scent molecule and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which are what is released when we're talking about scent. Some of them are heavy, some of them stick down to the ground, some of them are very light, some of them burn off very quickly. So it really depends on the material, I suppose, or the thing that is being looked for. So one example of a very difficult kind of odor, I suppose, would be dogs that are trained on electrical devices. So we've got dogs that are trained to find SD cards within houses, and they are looking for a specific scent that's used on the internal component of that SD card. So it's not a very volatile scent. It's something that obviously is quite a difficult one. There are other natural scents as well that are difficult. Some things are just not as smelly as others. So it's just really important to ensure that you're training over a long period of time to make sure the dog's understanding what you're asking it to do.
Right. Are there particular dog breeds you find that are easier to train than others?
Great question. Yes, so pretty much any dog can do scent work, but there's no question about that at all. What the kind of types of dogs that we look for in this kind of work are typically the kind of gun dog breeds, or also things like shepherds and Malinois, Belgian shepherds. But working labs, Springer Spaniels, Cocker Spaniels, and to some extent German Pointers. They're all the kind of dogs that you often see doing this work because they've got that drive, they've got that real wish to work. They are usually quite biddable and they're eager to train, they're eager to please. So yeah, it's usually those kind of working type breeds. But what's a really important aspect of it is that your dog is, while you've got the drive, you've got the play, you've really got, my dogs are, if they put my training jacket on, there is nothing they want to do else. They are on it. But you want that drive to not be on prey animals, which is a really important aspect of this because you can't have a dog that is working out operationally and might then go and chase a deer, chase a sheep. So it's a fine balance because obviously the dog's brains are wired, in that way. So you need to make sure that they understand that your game is more fun. Your game is better than anything else they could find. So that's the kind of dogs we're looking for this kind of work.
Right. A couple of comments from Megan. We've also been considering how dogs could be used for marine invasive species. It would be great to get in touch to chat to you more about these types of applications. Megan also says, thanks for the talk. In the Falklands, JNCC are working with the South Atlantic detection dogs on using these dogs for conservation of endangered species. Megan, if you wanted to message me your email address, I can pass it on to Texa and get you in touch if that would be interesting. So thank you for that. And I think the final question for now is there an age limit for getting dogs into this kind of area? We have a 6-year-old spaniel who loves scent work. It would be great to get her to earn her kibbles.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say so. As long as the dog is fit and healthy, I wouldn't say so. And there's definitely no such thing as an old dog can't learn new tricks. That is definitely not true. So if you've got a dog that's nice and drivey, and certainly spaniel, they are absolutely perfect for this kind of work. So yeah, I don't see why not. Certainly, as I said, if you're interested in learning more, the Ecology Detection Dog Britain and Ireland Working Group is the place to kind of go to get some more information and meet some other folk doing this sort of work in loads of different targets and species. So that's where I'd go. But yeah, definitely get your dog earning some kibble. That's great.
And I think there is just one last question which I missed, which is what future potential do you think this kind of work has? It sounds like there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I think particularly for the shellfish aquaculture for DVIX, is definitely one thing. I've presented this work at the Shellfish Growers Conference in Scotland last year, and they're folk who are trying to produce shellfish, but also being kind of finding it very difficult to manage their biosecurity because of the difficulties the species is showing. So I think there's definitely applications there. And certainly I'd like to see with the slipper limpets in particular, at the moment, the people who actually first identified that species as an issue in the northeast of Scotland is a community group. And at the moment they're kind of voluntary going out looking for the limpets on the shoreline, removing them and, getting rid of them. It would be really nice if there's an ability to support their work and stop them having to go out in the wind and the rain every day and scouring the shore. So yeah, I think we're really just scratching the surface of where this stuff can go. But the real test is obviously the proof of concept and being able to confidently say, yes, we've got these dogs on these novel species. So it's the start of a really exciting journey.
Excellent. I think that's probably actually a really good place to wrap it up. So that was all the questions we had come in. So thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Texa, for that talk. It was really fascinating, plus probably the cutest science talk we've had for a while. So thank you very much for that. And hopefully see you all at the next science talk. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.